on, let's get some of the lads together. Let's have a go here. Okay, go on, fellas. Get around the corner. Let's have a good go. Come on, then. You ready? Come on, you lot. Go on, then.
Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Lincoln City are the team, the Reds is their name. Stinsel Bank is their home ground and football is their game. So come and cheer them on, you lads, support them all the way. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white, the Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight.
Morning all, how we doing? Morning Jimmy. Bloody hell, Jim Atkins on quick. I haven't been on 5 seconds, look, and he's on. So it's just a quick one. Basically, I'm doing a podcast later on today. Got a special guest on coming on to discuss the transfer window and the squad as a whole, rather than simply deadline day, as well as do some of the normal podcast stuff. And I figure that there's going to be an awful lot for us to kind of pick over and go through. And so I thought I'd do a quick deadline day debrief. The local anaesthetic on my jaw from the dentist this morning has worn off. So all I'm left with now is pain. So that's a winner. So it means that I'm not dribbling. I'm not all over the place. So I can do a quick dog walk, or rather a Gary walk, while the dog stands at the end of the road looking at me, but he'll follow when he realizes I'm not going back. So I just wanted to pick over deadline day. First of all, can I say I think deadline day is a pain in the arse, if I'm honest. I'm not a fan of deadline day at all. I think finishing at 11 o'clock at night puts a lot of stress on clubs. It puts a lot of stress on players. It puts a lot of stress on all manner of things, with late bids and deals and things almost falling through and working to the deadline. And every single year it's the same. Teams just seem to wait. Every team says they're in a chain. Every team says they want to get their business done early, and then every team gets to deadline day, and that's when the business moves. And whatever the reason is for things not moving, it's very stressful. How you kind of change that for clubs like Lincoln City and clubs in League One and League Two in general, I don't know. Do we have a deadline day that actually comes a week after the Premier League deadline shuts, so that Premier League clubs can then assess their squad, they can let players go out to the Championship, and that generally filters down? Maybe. I think a deadline day that finishes at 5 o'clock would be beneficial for everybody involved. Particularly fans. I mean, last year with deadline day we had a game on it. This year Premier League, so we moved deadline day. It's all a little bit strange, I think, but I don't like it. It's as simple as that. I don't like it. I don't like the way if a player goes out at last minute, you can then be stuck. If you're a club like Lincoln, you have to sell. We sell to survive, and we obviously did that last night. And people are saying, well, we can't replace Scully. We were never going to replace Scully. That's the way it is. We've got a replacement for Scully already. That happened at the weekend when Jack Diamond came in. And I actually think, and I will come on to it in a bit, but I actually think had Anthony Scully not left, one of the loans out may have been one of our new signings that came into play out wide, because I don't think we would have gone into the autumnal part of the season carrying 5 wingers. And it's easy to do the square pegs in round holes. So it's easy to say, well, Garrett could play centre forward, so he's not a winger, that sort of thing. I think that the club like to have 2 for every position, but that isn't one that can cover 2 positions. So when you say 2 for every position, we're not talking about a player that, well, he's attacking midfielder and he can play up front, so he'll do both. You're talking about 22 senior players, 2 for every single position. And I think that's probably where we are. And I think if you add up the squad and look at the squad, we're actually 1 short on that. And I think that the club probably acknowledge that. And my understanding is that probably Ben House he's the unknown, because whether we like him in midfield or in attack, whichever one he is, the other one we're actually slightly light on, especially with Mandry, who considered a winger by the club. So he's not considered the attacking central midfielder. So in midfield, obviously, you've now got Matty Virtue, who I'll come to in a minute, Lass Sorensen. So there's 2 for that role. You've then got Ted Bishop, Max Sanders, and Tashan Oakley-Booth. And potentially Ben House, and then that leaves just Tom Hopper up front. If we'd kept Charlie Kendall, obviously, as people would really have liked us to do, that would have been number 9s. There's a romance around Charlie Kendall, which again I'll talk about a little bit tonight on the podcast. But I think for Charlie, the best thing for him to do, and I've said Charlie, and now my dog's following me, he's got to be playing regular games. He wasn't going to be playing regular games for us, and there's a real danger that he could go like, I mean, it was National League, but when we signed the likes of Adi Yusuf and Samir Kabir, who were meant to be good players, and even Wade Fairhurst to a degree, but you can't get the minutes into them, and then they become unhappy and they want to leave. We need Charlie to be playing regular games. I think that he has the talent to go on and be a very, very good footballer for this football club. I don't think he's gone out on loan in a kind of a Theo and Archibald, thanks for the memories loan. I think that he's gone out on loan genuinely to come back and impact the first team. I obviously would like to have seen another striker come in, and I still think that the club will probably be looking at free agent market. Not an awful lot there. Probably the biggest name I saw on there was Mark McNulty, and we're not going to sign a big name. If the deal's right, you never know. But I read a bit about McNulty and the way he was at Reading, and I'm not sure he's the type of player that fits the profile that we want in terms of personality. And that brings us to the first bit of deadline day news that came out, and that was King Shithouse, as I think he would be proud to be called, Chris Maguire leaving the club. Zero surprise. And I know some observers had seen him play a couple of games in pre-season, or not pre-season, sorry, but a couple of games in the early part of the season, and kind of gone, he could have a role to play for us. He could, and he had 46 games last season to prove that he could play that role and be a senior player, and he only proved it in one of them, or maybe two of them, three of them, on a consistent basis. Incredibly frustrating player, very, very talented, very, very good footballer. Will almost, in my opinion, certainly go somewhere like the Scottish Premier League, to a lower end Scottish Premier League team, like an Aberdeen, where I think he was before, and tear it up, because that, if he's happy where he is, he plays well. I think that's the thing with Chris Maguire. He's either got to be insanely happy and therefore plays really well and slots in nicely, or he's got to have a massive point to prove. And the problem with proving a point is that it only really happens over the odd couple of games. He was very good for Sunderland under Lee Johnson when he was given a chance, because all he wanted to do was stick two fingers up. And I think that's why when he came into the side earlier this season and we saw him putting himself about, and people were thinking, yeah, he looks a player again now, doesn't he? It's only because he desperately wanted to score, so he could kind of, run around the pitch looking at us all, going, there you are, this is what Maguire does. So I don't think there was ever any way back for him. I think that him playing in those early games was always essentially just a case of needs must. Simple. And he's now gone. The betting thing hanging over his head is not something that I think the club really wanted to carry. And I think the very short nature of the club have accepted a mutual termination just suggested to me that there isn't an awful lot of love lost. When he left Oxford, he was very popular with the fans. When he left Sunderland, he was very popular with the fans, not with the squad. When he left Bury, I think that there was a real mutual dislike. I don't think that anybody's going to talk about Chris Maguire in particularly favourable terms. Very, very good footballer, but just not willing at times, it seemed. Frustrating footballer, should have had more output, and it wasn't a surprise. But the twist of irony that I keep saying is, I won 20 quid on it, because I bet my dad and my mate Matt 10 quid a piece that he'd be gone by Christmas. I actually said he'd be gone on deadline day, mutual cancellation. So I got that one right. So the next bit of business, massively overshadowed, which I feel really, really quite sad about. And it was similar last deadline day when we signed Jamie Robson, and it was overshadowed by people coming in and going out. And I was kind of saying, look, we've signed Jamie Robson. Everyone was going, and another one. And this year, Matty Virtue came in when it was already fairly well known that we weren't looking at a striker. We were looking at just one player coming in. Matty Virtue came in, the central midfielder that I think we've been looking for since the beginning of the window. Certainly the profile of player that we've been looking at since the beginning of the window. But it was very much kind of overshadowed a little bit by the things that began to happen after it. It wasn't particularly long afterwards that news began to break that Scully was potentially on his way, which was the headline really from deadline day. Now I think that Matty Virtue is on paper a very, very good signing for this football club, and I'm always very cautious. I said last year we'll not know the quality of the transfer window last year until this year or the year after. There might be players that we signed in last year's transfer window, like Lars Sorensen, who go on to be very good footballers for the club but struggle in the first year. Tom Pett was a classic example of coming in a transfer window, not immediately impressing, and then going on to do very well for the club. So it's really, really hard, I think, for fans to judge a window. And yesterday's window was being judged before it was closed. People were saying, well, we missed out on Alex Gilby, where's the replacement? Before we'd even announced, at that point it was frustrating because I kind of knew that Matty Virtue was at the EPC. So it was really frustrating because I couldn't say anything. But first of all, we don't know if we missed out on Alex Gilby or not. It was, kind of agent talk and journalist talk, and there's never anything official from the club. It seems that we were linked, but chatting to some people behind the scenes at the club, it does seem to me like the strength of the links were probably being driven more from one end than the other. And Charlton kind of were rumoured to not really be playing ball. I don't know. Matty Virtue is 25 years old, as we know. He was captain of Liverpool under 23s. He's played relatively regularly for Blackpool, apart from a spell that he had out injured a couple of seasons ago. Started this year playing for them in the Championship. The general consensus from Blackpool fans was, why are we getting rid of this player when he's kind of got a future with us? So for me, I like the look of this signing. I haven't seen an awful lot of Matty Virtue. If I'm honest, I haven't had a chance to look through his Wikipedia stats. I have kind of done a bit of research, chatted to a couple of people, and he certainly seems like the sort of player that we needed. He's the sort of player that can play in the holding role, or go box to box. We might see him a little bit more attacking, but he's an all-rounder. Yeah, when I say all-rounder, the first thing I always think when I say all-rounder is John Finnegan. I'm showing my age there, I know. But for me, he was an all-round midfielder. He didn't actually score as many goals as perhaps he should have done. But I just liked John Finnegan. He was box to box. He would break up play. He could do the dirty stuff. He could do the fancy stuff. That sounds like Matty Virtue. And I think when you throw him in with Max Sanders and Lasse Sorensen and Tashan Oakley-Booth, there's a good core midfield there. Does it have the right amount of strength? Time will tell. I think our midfield looked a little disjointed towards the end of the Fleetwood game. It would have been nice to have been able to bring another midfielder on. So, maybe if Sorensen and Virtue are not playing at the same time and you want to go a little bit more defensive, but not three at the back, you can then go with the double fours. And I think Virtue gives you that. Max Sanders gives you that, who's been out injured as well. I really like the look of the signing. And, proof is always when they step across the paint. As Danny Cowley used to say, you can read everything you want in stats, in articles from fans. You can go as deep on it as you want, but as soon as they step over the paint and they're on the pitch, it's up to them, and that's something that we can't quantify. So I like the look of Matty Virtue. It's a real shame it was overshadowed by the news that then broke a little bit later on, which was Anthony Scully's departure. Now, earlier in the day, I'd had a chat with kind of a club insider on the sly, who had suggested that there was no players, there'd been no bids. They weren't expecting any bids for any players. There was a plan in place, were we not to have a bid in for players, to lose one potentially on loan. And as the day progressed, I was told, if you want an update, you're more than welcome to have one, but it'll be after this time. And I spoke to the club after this time, and he kind of said to me, well, look, there has been interest now in Anthony Scully, and there might be a deal there to be done. There might be. And then our valuation was met by Wigan, as we know now, and things started to progress. And this really, I think, began kind of, half eight-ish was when it started to come out of the club. I think the first indication of interest that I heard was a little bit earlier than that. So things had to happen very quickly. Obviously, he has to get over to Wigan. He has to have a medical. There has to be personal terms agreed, but the two clubs had agreed the deal. Now, at that stage, anything could still happen. So whilst it's easy to say, well, we could have gone out to get a replacement, which we wouldn't have done anyway, but we could have said, we could go out and buy another player. We could go out and get a player that we previously didn't think we could afford. At that stage, it's very, very late. And you've got to remember, it's just logistics, because it's easy to say, well, we could have had that done and dusted. But let's assume, for instance, we'll use Swansea as an example. So let's assume that it was a striker from Swansea, and I'm only using them because we've done business with them. There's no underlying kind of current here. So we think, well, if we sell Anthony Scully, we'll bring in this centre forward from Swansea. So we tell that centre forward from Swansea, we want to buy you, but we've got to sell this player. And it gets to 6 o'clock at night, and the centre forward from Swansea still, there's no indication that he might be might be moving to us, because there's no indication from Lincoln that we've had a bid on Scully. Then things start to happen. So where's that player logistically, physically? Where is he? Does he sit in a travel lodge halfway between Swansea and Lincoln just in case? What if another player club comes in for him? Maybe Newport coming for him on loan or something like that. So where does he logistically base himself? It's really easy to say we should have something in place. But I just think physically, the way that deadline day kind of everything happens at once, it isn't possible. As soon as you accept a bid you were not expecting at that time of day for a player, if you are looking to reinvest that money quickly, you are really up against it. And then you've also got the problem of potentially, because you're rushing, will we overpay? Is it the right player? What if the first player we go to turns down? Do you start going down the list? Done it on Football Manager a couple of times, and you just end up with trash. You think, oh God, I'm loaded with this guy for a 3-year deal, because personal terms have got to be agreed. And agents don't agree personal terms 3 weeks before, and then 3 weeks later go, yeah, everything's all right. Some agents play silly buggers. There was one agent last transfer window, a player that we signed, who the player had agreed. They were still driving on the motorway coming to Lincoln, and the agent was still on one phone trying to get a better deal where the player had already agreed it. So I just think it is really, really tough, and it wouldn't surprise me if Scully's in Lincoln 6 o'clock. Get yourself to Wigan. I can be there by 9. He gets there by 9. He's got to agree personal terms. It's touch and go. It's very, very risky business. Will we miss Anthony Scully? Of course we will. Of course we'll miss him. He scored 37 goals for the club in what, 2 seasons, 2.5 seasons. But can you really call these, his first bit of half season? Finished in March. He scored 3 goals then. I think it was 3, 15, and 3, 4 this year. Of course we're going to miss him. Did he fully complement? I'll come back to Pete Summers' comment in a minute. Did he fully complement what we were trying to do? I'm not so sure. I thought on Saturday what we did, we actually lacked real width. I've said it a few times with Scully. I actually think rather than a winger, I think he'd be better as a 10 or better as playing off a big striker. And I get that he's kind of been billed as a winger, but I don't think he has the out-and-out pace. And I think if you remember a game in the Fleetwood, there was an effort of Fleetwood where he's put free and the fullback caught him relatively easily. And for me, he just kind of, I'm not saying he's slow, but we didn't have any pace in the side at all. And you've got to have, for me, at least one quick winger, and then you can swap and try and exploit the slower fullback and give him some real problems. And we didn't have that. He could produce the unexpected, no doubt whatsoever about that. And now he's gone. You're not going to get me coming on here and saying negative stuff about him. I'm only going to say what I've said ever since I first saw him play, and in the setup that we play, I don't think played to Anthony Scully's strengths. And for me, that is more of a testament to the player that we're going to sign, because if he's not an out-and-out left winger, I never quite knew where to play, where I thought he should play for Lincoln. I just knew he had to be on the pitch because he could score goals. If Wigan can get him playing in a position that really suits him, they've got a hell of a player, and you and I both know it. And we've got money in the bank, which hopefully we can look to reinvest. We won't reinvest all of it, because part of the model is that we sell in order just to sustain and survive. And people forget that. They absolutely forget that. So I don't think obviously I've said, I don't think we're particularly looking to replace him. I think in Vernon and Diamond and Garrick, we've got 3 wingers who can certainly do a job for us. I understand Danny Mandrew is being counted as a winger rather than as the attacking midfielder that I kind of had him down for. And we don't see some of these players, do we, on a weekly basis? We see them on a weekly or 2 weekly basis, depending on how regularly you go away. But we don't see them day to day on the training ground. So, look, I'm going to cover later where I think this has left us deficient, almost certainly. I'm certainly going to look at where I think we still probably need a body or two, and I'll get Chris's opinion as well on the podcast a little bit later. So I don't want to kind of ruin the podcast by going into it far too deep, But Pete made a good point. Wasn't Robson lined up as Eden's replacement for a while, and then he signed after Eden came in? Now, the Teo Eden situation is very different because Teo Eden was subject of a bid and had gone to another club to discuss personal terms a while before the transfer window. It's well known he went to Peterborough United. It's well known we accepted a bid from Peterborough and he went there. So at that point, it looked like he was going to leave. And so at that point, we went and we did initiate transfer dealings with Dundee United for Jamie Robson. Teo Eden then pulled out. So we then pulled out of Jamie Robson's deal. However, a lot of the legwork had already been done. So when, as expected, Blackburn Rovers came in, yes, Robson was waiting in the wings, not kind of unexpected that Teo Eden left. On deadline day, when deadline day started, it was widely expected Teo Eden would leave. It had been suggested probably, I think, 2 days before had been some initial contact with Blackburn Rovers. So this wasn't a case of someone coming in for Teo Eden at 6 o'clock on deadline day and us going, oh, it's all right, we've kept Jamie Robson strung along. And you have to remember that if you do that too many times, and this was something I was fortunate enough to talk to Danny Cowley about, if you string too many players along, it works for a transfer window. So you can cover yourself and protect yourself one transfer window by agreeing deals left, right and centre, going, yep, we'll definitely do that. And then deadline day comes, you pick and choose which ones you want, you're insulated once. Because the next transfer window you try and do that, players talk to players. The clubs that you've dealt with, not going to be burned twice. Agents who might have 20, 30, 40 players, not going to be burned twice. You get the reputation. So there's an element, I think, of that as well, that you have to be, I'm not going to say be fair to agent, because most agents, they're sucking money out of the game for themselves, and they're not doing it for the good of the club. And me and Pete have regularly spoke about how all agencies should be through the PFA. They should take a nominal fee, should be paid a standard wage, and then they're not trying to force moves. Agents are the scourge of the game. You haven't got to be fair to them. You have got to be fair to other clubs. What if we had decided we wanted to sign a player from League Two? We'd got it all done, we'd agreed a deal, and then we were sat there going, well, we'll only go through with that deal if such and such comes off. Or Man City last season, what if it'd be Luis Fiorini, and we've gone, wow, we're only going to bother with Fiorini if we sell such and such. Next time we go to Man City, we're not going to get to loan a player, and we haven't loaned one from this season. Swansea would be a better idea, a better example. We were respectful despite being shafted by Swansea last summer, and yet we still were able to go back to Swansea and get Morgan Whittaker and Liam Cullen. I think Whittaker did well. I don't think Cullen did. And then we were able to go and get Jordan Garrick, who I think could be a big player for us. So I think that the way that you are perceived and your reputation within the football world is also quite important. And again, we could have insulated. Look, it's not a perfect transfer window, and they're certainly going to come on and cover that, I think, a little bit later on the podcast. But actually, aside from not seeing a striker, which I do feel was essential, which I still feel is essential. So again, I'm not going to gloss it up. I'm not all rainbows and sugar and dancing and sunshine, but I'm not all clouds and lightning and injections in the mouth either. So I'll chat about that later. But actually, in terms of deadline day, I think it went better than I felt it was going to go at 5 o'clock. And that's even bringing Matty Virtue in. I think shedding the Chris Maguire wage is solid. I actually think selling Anthony Scully for a fee was a better option for the football club than having to loan out a player that I don't have this confirmed, but likely having to loan out a player that we had signed in the summer. I think that would have been a disaster in terms of reputation, in terms of the way that players see us. And there were only two, I think, that would have been affected had Scully stayed. Either Danny Mandry or Charles Vernon would have been adversely affected. It's that simple. Because we've loaned Garrick, we've loaned Diamond. You would think, probably with Diamond and Scully being left wingers, you would think it would have been Vernon that would have been the unlucky man. I really like Charles Vernon. He's somebody who, the second I spoke to him, I felt engaged. I felt he wanted to be here. I felt he's passionate about our football club, about the area. He's a local boy. and the glimpses that we've seen of him, he's got a trick. He'll knock it beyond, dip a shoulder, go round. I think there's an element of the Bruno Andrade in him, if I'm honest. He's obviously a slightly different profile of player, but I can see that kind of winger. I really like him, and I'm delighted that he will now hopefully have an equal opportunity to get into the first team as any of the other wingers. So here we go. I am now about to, sorry, just 1 second again. Pete says, if one other wide player was going to be loaned out at Scully's stay, then they must have known they were fifth choice, not fourth choice. Not necessarily, because Scully could have been fifth choice, but we wouldn't have dropped him because he was a saleable asset. So we would have had to have gotten game time. So it's not a case of anyone being first choice to fourth choice. And that's a very kind of obtuse way of looking at football selection, as if you are fourth choice and that's where you are. I think with a goalkeeper, there's first choice, second choice. But I think with things like wingers and attacking midfielders, where there's multiple positions, form affects that. I think setup affects that. You are a winger who's required to kind of track back in a like a 3-5-2, so like a fullback type winger, which Morgan Whittaker played last season. So I don't think it was as blatantly simple as saying simple as saying he's fourth choice, he's fifth choice. First of all, it's two per position. So actually, you're not a fourth choice winger. You're either the starting right winger or you're coming on the right wing. I think that the problem is that when you have a saleable asset like Anthony Scully, you have to play him. That's why Regan Poole will start 90% of the games, because he's the saleable asset. And I would imagine that in the January window, we'll kind of be hoping that somebody comes in with a cash bid for him. So you have to kind of play to your strengths as well. And whilst I know that you do play to form, I think over the last couple of months, would Scully have started as many games were he not a saleable? Potentially not. I don't think, I think through pre-season it was blatantly obvious that Charles Vernon was the first choice left winger. So I don't think that in terms of squad morale, there'll be that much problem. The player may be affected by being told you may have had to have gone out, but if that player is of the right attitude, has got the right attitude, then they'll understand that's football. And you'd be surprised talking to some of the players how much you get the answer, that's just football, over transfer deadlines, and were you worried that you were going to leave, and you're injured and struggle to get back into the team and all that. It is quite interesting. And like Pete, you've just said, they must have known they've been lined up for a loan move. Of course, and it will have been. I don't think that it will have been sold to them as your third choice. It'll be sold to them as, it's either Charles Vernon or Danny Mandrew, and it will have been sold as, you've been injured at the start of the season. We've loaned on the right, or this player in on the left. So they're going to be vying for a place, and we've also got this player on the right or this player on the left. So I get the point that you're saying, but I think that you're now just genuinely being obtuse to try and get back at me for the comment on social media about red and white kits. So thanks for that. Right, anyway, here we go. So I am done and dusted with my dog walk. I appreciate everybody taking back. There we go. It's frustrating. As soon as I come up the drive, my phone connects to the home internet. I despise it doing it. I can't stop it doing it, and so that's why I cut out. So anyway, have a listen later. We'll be recording a podcast at about 5:30. By the time it's edited, etc., it might be up at 7:30, 8 o'clock-ish. So it might be something to listen to on your way down to Cambridge tomorrow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a good day. Cheers.